Hello and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by PistilWhip. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about the waters of knowledge, the delicious info ambrosia, the drink of the gods. PistilWhip begins. Previous parlays have touched on the nature of accessibility and knowledge. Here's another meme take on the sources of knowledge, featuring the fount of all knowledge, the tap of occasional insight, the bucket of useless trivia, the sprinkler of dubious facts, and the puddle of misleading statistics. For this last-minute April parlay, I'd like Captain to discuss the socioeconomic and biochemical implications of each source of knowledge. What treatments could be performed on each, if any, to make them both palatable and safe to drink? Consider such treatments as boiling, distillation, filtration, coagulation, reverse osmosis, and so on. Perhaps also discuss the mineral content and tasting notes of these knowledge sources. For bonus points, here's an archive parlay from some 2.5 years ago. I don't remember what you originally said, but now you can share it on YouTube for posterity. The Norse god Odin gave an eye to sup from Mimir's well of wisdom. As a fellow connoisseur, what flavor notes do you think were present? Spicy, lit, or even dank? And we'll answer that at the end. I spent a little more time than normal preparing for this parlay, so it might be a little shorter than normal. But I specifically didn't prepare for that one because it would be fun to do it like an archive parlay again, where I just have to do it on the spot. Yeah. And so, yeah, we'll go through all 5 of the liquid forms of knowledge being presented here and discuss them a bit. I thought about them ahead of time a little because to some extent it's required that we sort of define or give an example of, I don't know, for example, like occasional insight. That seems relatively straightforward, but then useless trivia. I think some people may be in disagreement about what counts as useless trivia or like sprinkler of dubious facts. Like, how is that different from misleading statistics? Personally, I feel like I have a good answer of that now. But this is the kind of thing that I feel like it can be very difficult to give an example on the moment. So I thought of one ahead of time. Yeah, so let's start with the fount of knowledge. The fount of knowledge. Knowledge here I will define as data, like just raw information. The fount of all knowledge. You basically just learn every, datum on the planet. Now, I think there's an implication when you consume this type of beverage, or any event like this in fiction, usually, where, well, I would hope so anyway, where you just learn everything, the totality of things. I believe that there's an implication that that knowledge doesn't contain, but results in wisdom as well. In other words, you gain like a better way of thinking about the knowledge, not as a direct result of learning it all, like it doesn't inject a better understanding into your brain, but knowing all those things, I guess would change people's minds. For a long time, I've had a thought experiment in my mind that I use whenever I think about other people's perspectives. That is, what would I expect to happen if I was able to kind of force or share my perspective onto them? If theirs was shared onto me. If everybody understood the way that, for example, I think about death or like the meaning of life, what would happen? Would a ton of people drop dead out of sheer existential terror that they've been putting at bay, but then I'm forcing them not to do that? Would a lot of people suddenly stop what they're doing and do something completely different? I think no to both of those things. I think that without further context, that would just seem like another unruly perspective. I think that this, however, is a case where you probably gain enough information to see, you inconsiderate person littering or whatever. If the totality of all human joy lost when walking through the beautiful woods and seeing that piece of garbage that you inconsiderately left on the ground was inflicted upon you, I think most people would just be paralyzed and unable to do that. They just would not be able to litter out of sheer groupthink, which I don't think is the worst thing in the world, by the way, though it would have some actual consequences. It would prevent some people, I think, from doing the things they do. Not because other people think it's bad, but just because they would actually understand what they're really doing. You know, if you really saw the full context of that action, you wouldn't take it. And the reason that people do is because they're not thinking about it, not because they're thinking about it and their thoughts about it say that it makes sense to do. It's a lack of thinking about it. And so here, I think we're seeing that you would likely be largely paralyzed. Is this a paralytic poison? Nay. I personally think that this is more that it just tastes like everything. And like the espresso tonic that kind of mutes your sense of bitterness because it's bitter on bitter and you only have so many bitter receptors, tasting like everything is not so different from tasting like nothing at all. You would probably have that thing where it's kind of just too much. And so it tastes like nothing that particularly registers. But then thereafter, for the rest of the day, millennia, you would have the little flavor savor sensation. You know what I'm talking about? That thing where there's kind of something lingering in your mouth and it makes everything taste weird. It reminds me a little bit of miracle berry, miraculum. I forget exactly what it's called. There's this fruit, I guess, and you can get it as a kind of dried pellet or powder extract thing that changes your sour receptors to register sweet, basically. Or it binds all your sour receptors. Anyway, and so this reminds me of that a little bit. It's going to mess with your sense of taste by the sheer mass of perspective that you've been granted. What do you do with this as a flavor sensation? Well, it's not particularly sensible to drink. It seems, I don't know, as safe as anything. Like we always say, you know, balance in all things. And so if you only have a tiny bit of everything, but it's everything, you could say that's okay, or you could say any bad thing that you could be drinking, you did drink a little bit of it, including, oh, cyanide. I don't know, just for starters, it could be any number of things. So you could say it's not particularly safe. The way I would like to think of it is, it's just not particularly usable by itself. You need to turn this into an ingredient, I think, pair it with something, make it more palatable by emphasizing some of its flavors rather than just by diluting it down. To me, this is the example where, because you know so much information, without a method to parse through all of that, you know, your system hasn't really been upgraded. You just learned a lot of data, but you have no parsing system to navigate that data in a useful way. This would be like having a computer that has access to the internet, but no human to choose what web page to go, to decide which information to take in, to interpret that information in a useful way. The fount of all knowledge may result in you having some different perspectives, some wisdom is growing, but it itself has not, through my description anyway, this version has not granted you a better system for parsing through that information. And so much like drinking, it is going to be significantly more enjoyable if you pair it with something, bring out some of the warmer undertones by pairing it with some a syrup, maybe use it as a diluted syrup spice in a pie and drizzle it over some delicious fruit to emphasize those notes, or include it as a pickling liquid was the first thing I imagined, so that says a lot, for jalapenos, and see if those grassy and spicy flavors couple onto any particular bit of information. You're going to need to decide how you're going to interpret this big chunk of new information. Personally, I am thinking that if I drank this, I have things I want to know from it. You know what I mean? There would be some bits of information that I'm not just surprised by everything. There would be some things that I would go, oh, I'm looking for that piece of information. It's possible that the context that I'll get by learning all of this stuff will make me care less about the things that I would think I would be excited to learn if this happened to me. But I hope not. It's hard to imagine I'm going to learn something so unbelievable, something so inconceivable I've never imagined in all my constant imagining of all the horrible things it could be all the time in my life. I think about this often. And so is it really going to be that there's going to be something so shocking, so different from what I would expect that I'll no longer care about the things I would have wanted to know? Zandy, what are those? Well, for example, like I would want to see people in their, you know, their alone moments. Like, what are people behaving like when no one is around to see. The old tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it. It's that kind of stuff that I would want to know personally. Or being able to see after a public interaction with, a friend or a colleague, what happens behind the scenes. What's the after story of that? This would give you new context on people. It would be a piece of information. You could imagine many things it would be, and in and of themselves, they're not that meaningful, but it would help you understand people in a new way. Am I going to carry this around with me and drink it all the time? Do you only get all the knowledge right when you drink it? Does it snapshot? These are the types of mechanics that I think we're never going to finish this parlay if we get into. So let's move on to the tap of occasional insight. Like tapping a tree, this is delicious, sweet, a subtle but sweet nectar, like sap from a tree, but requires both processing and like a storage container. You need to be patient and gather it by writing it down as it comes up in daily life, but in this case by using a water bottle, a milk jug perhaps, and then also to process it, to boil it down, parse through all those things. The tap is one of my favorite ways of information gathering and dispensing and distilling and drinking, and that is because it's very easy to do in your everyday life. I have a notepad document, like a very simple, word processor, I guess, on my computer that just collects all the little things throughout the day that I would like to sort of store somewhere else. I've heard that concept called some fancy stuff, like having a second brain or whatever, that is not really helpful. That's kind of anti-helpful is a way to think about it, in my opinion, but is, good for a YouTube thumbnail or something. Really, I think it's a more mundane thing. You're just helping your brain remember or emphasize things that you want to draw attention to. Have an idea that you feel like it might get away from you, but there could be some use for eventually. Just write it down. The great thing about doing this is it's kind of like seeing something cool in a store, like a tchotchke or something, some kind of random piece of junk that you think, but that would be sort of cool in this very specific way. Look, if you buy that, you have to physically store it in your space, cluttering the space physically, which clutters the space mentally. This is like wonderfully the opposite. You can save all the things and you're kind of getting it out of the way of your mind. And yet, if you ever need it, it takes up zero real space, but is also permanently accessible. You don't have to do anything to maintain it basically forever. And so if it ever does come up, great. Usually like twice a year, or sometimes a little more or less often, I read back through most of the document. And occasionally throughout, the week or month, that I'm adding stuff to it, I will edit things out as well. I might write a ton of stuff in there and then I get done with it. Some of it might be a to-do list and I'll check things off. Others might be like a big thought that I did something about or I turned into something else and then I just clear it out of there. But for the most part, I don't do a whole lot of cleaning or pruning, as it were. I basically just let it go. I guess I'm fermenting. Is that what this is like? It's not particularly what you do with tree sap, like boiling and reducing it down. This is really more like distilling. You're saving the little bits and combining them all up into something more satisfying. After all, it's generally not much to just have this thought in the moment. Ooh, what a satisfying little piece of novelty, and then it just goes away. I'm not sure I want to like stick my head under the tap and be drinking, as the tiny amount of fluid comes out. That's out of context. And rather I would want to build it up. I want to gather all of the occasional insights and make them into something a bit more. This is a really valuable thing. I'm not going to give much advice in this parlay, but if this is something that you feel like you would keep up with, I would highly encourage you to do it. Just start writing down these little things. Sometimes when I've talked to people about this in my personal life, they say, but I won't have anything to write down. You will have more things to write down if you make a space to write them down and get in the habit when it comes up. You will think of more times to write things down. You actually do have more to write down than you think you do, but you will literally have more thoughts if you have a place to write them down. Your brain will learn that there is a point to doing that type of processing, and you will start generating more ideas. This is one of the only ways to actually create more knowledge in your head. to generate more thoughts. Just have creative ideas. You literally can. This is one of the only ways I've thought of. Paradoxically, despite the fact that this one pictures the lowest flow, it can be the most valuable. Scarcity, it is not. This is just how the good ideas come out. Be there to save them, and luck will favor the prepared. One of the more delicious ones, I think we can agree. In fact, is this the only one you actually want to drink? I guess balance in all things again. The bucket of useless trivia. Here, useless trivia will be defined as something like the hour that a famous person was born. It's up for debate if knowing a thing about a person just because they are famous has any merit to begin with, let alone something like the specific time they were born, which is just almost guaranteed to be useless in every possible way. There's almost zero chance that will be helpful. This is the type of information that doesn't make you look worldly or well-studied. It makes it look like you have no discerning palate, that you're willing to just internalize anything, any little tiny chunk of information. I hate these. I think this has come up in Parley before. I have I think a little bit of a problem actually with how hostile I am toward this type of factoid. Sort of trivia shows also really push my buttons. People already have enough of a problem with overemphasizing information, which just isn't such an important thing to begin with, or a thing to be fetishized. It's just unfortunate that we don't know these pieces of information going forward. It's not something to emphasize. And yet I feel that some parts of the society around me kind of masturbate to, so many completely useless things. Like, how amazing is that? No, it's not. That's depressing that you existed and were able to internalize that. Your existence was so mind-numbing that you had room for this. That's bad. To me, this is kind of like that thing where, okay, so if you go to kind of low to mid-tier restaurants that are really busy, the places you'll find this would be, it's got a bar and they get busy for dinner and lunch, basically. They're gonna pre-batch their cocktails. What they're gonna do is make some kind of, I'll give you an example. I had one of these recently. So I was at a Japanese sort of hibachi place. And I went there because I know that they get really busy at lunch and dinner. And this is one of those places where if you go when it's busy, the food is not expensive, but pretty iffy. Whereas it's suddenly godlike for obviously the same price if you go at like 2:30 p.m. They're still there making no money. And so, it's not going to rush them or anything. And yet, the food will be delicious. It really is very good. Their sushi in particular is really, really good for not very much money. But because it gets really busy in the evenings and it's almost dead every other time of the day, while they do have a bar that is open those other times of the day, they almost never serve drinks when they're not really, really busy. They almost never sell anything when they're not really busy. So what they do is they build the cocktails in big batches ahead of time and then put them on the soda machine, so they can kind of dispense the drink very quickly. I had ordered a scorpion bowl at this bar, and it came out real quick, even though there were no free seats in the entire restaurant. The first time I went there, it was dinner. It was a bad choice. And it came in a glass. It didn't come in that scorpion bowl. If you haven't seen these, you look it up. You'll know what I mean pretty quickly. You'll probably have seen them in passing. It came in just a normal glass. It was the color, I guess, of a scorpion bowl. There was ice in it. There was a straw in it. There was a garnish, like a cherry and an orange speared together or something. It looked fine. And I drank it, and it had this quality that was like, yes, this is the taste of orange juice, brandy, perhaps pineapple juice and some sour mix. Rum, or are we doing the gin thing that people sometimes do with scorpion bowls? The recipes vary quite a bit, and this is a rum one. Not very much rum, though. And there's a lot of brandy. The balance is the balance. I mean, the more I tasted it, the more I felt like, this is not good, but why? Everything is here, it's fine. This is one of the scorpion bowl builds of all time, It's because it's not diluted at all. It's not shaken. They didn't, by just dispensing it, by just sterilely combining those ingredients and going, oh, I have a conversation starter for a party, and then giving it to you, they have failed to do the thing that makes cocktails taste like cocktails, which is shaking or stirring the darn thing. Adding a little bit of water is sort of the unspoken ingredient in a lot of cocktails. Really amazing cocktail recipes will include water, or like explain why you shake or stir for a certain amount of time, because it's an ingredient in the drink. And to know the specific method is to be able to produce that drink. Personally, an approach I like when I make drinks, just as an aside, is to make them using a great amount of ice, a large amount of ice, and then plan to literally pour water into the drink. In fact, what I do when I go to this restaurant now is I ask for extra water with the drink. Like I order your scorpion bowl and then make sure to also ask for a water alongside it. Or pour some of my partner's water in, because I know that it just needs extra water. They're actually left out an ingredient. If you make the drink really, really cold and you don't, you thereby reduce dilution, you put a ton of ice in your shaker, then you can add water and thus plan for any recipe that isn't going to tell you how much water to put in the drink by making sure the drink is really cold, and then you're just going to add water afterward. You'll have to add it to taste. This is a decent solution since the world is full of really good cocktails, but the recipe was never written down with the amount of water in it. But I would want to find a good way in my own recipes for cocktails to express whether or how much water you want in there. Anyway, and so to me, while I don't really want you to dilute your useless trivia, it's like the point isn't the facts. That's the thing. I think the reason for it's not diluting the trivia because I want even more things in there. It's diluting it because it doesn't matter that much. Now and again, everybody espouses some extremely random little thing. And sometimes it can be kind of interesting to see what someone who hates those types of things just like eventually picked up. You're gonna have retained some weird minutia, and there's nothing like particularly disgusting about that, I think. When it's heavily diluted, you see where I'm going with this. This is the one where you add that big old, no bigger than that big old splash of water. I mean, and you get that on ice, that nice cold ice. Another problem with pre-dispensing the drinks is they're not as cold as they would otherwise be. They were room temperature, and then they, got in the glass, and the ice has not yet chilled them down all the way. They weren't stirred down or anything, of course, because they're doing it to go fast, right? Of course, that problem's harder to solve. I guess you could refrigerate your soda pump thing. I don't know how difficult that is. They could solve the dilution. They could put in water ahead of time. You have a reason why you want to espouse these pointless minutia facts. Well, it might be worth exploring why you are doing that. For example, if you're going to have fancy cocktails at your bar, you're going to have a scorpion bowl. Well, but why? I mean, if people are just going to really quickly order drinks and they're going to be okay with the drink not being in its best form, does it make sense to have your extravagant cocktail like that? You're doing this to give people the option for something nicer, but you're kind of min-maxing on the effort it will take to dispense it. So putting in water is obvious when you conclude it that way. It's kind of embarrassing that they don't just put some water in there. That's how it works. It would even lengthen the drink. It would taste better. Everybody would be happier in every way. They would make more money. It would taste better. It takes basically no effort. But without thoroughly analyzing why they have all of the cocktails on tap, there is a kind of simple mistake that could otherwise easily be avoided, I guess. I liked this one. I out of the 5 of them, I've enjoyed talking about this one the most so far anyway. The sprinkler of dubious facts. Yeah, these last 2, it's like this is actually a problem. These are a biohazard that we need to more heavily process. If you've been thinking, you've been a little bit a little adventurous with drinking the random water that PistilWhip's graphic has sitting around. Yeah, not with these though. I mean, the bucket, you're diluting it quite heavily. The tap, come on. I mean, we're letting it ferment, distill. These are, they're gonna need some processing. The dubious facts one. To me, this is it's kind of like the other side of the problem of the on tap drinks. This is that oversweet, like heavy liqueur drink that doesn't have any flavor balance. It's like you just put in some really strong ingredients without really thinking about them very much. This is that you're kind of in a discussion with someone and it's very tempting. It's very difficult to teach yourself not to do this, for me anyway, to try to mention any branch of conversation that you feel like is relevant. And I feel like where part of this comes from is that you feel like it makes sense to want to mention, I've thought about this a lot. I hope you will be interested in my thoughts about this. I'm not just trying to dismissively say, oh, I thought about this for 2 seconds and here's my, conclusion. You say, oh, I don't think that, I don't know, Boone in Hades is any good. And you might say, oh, well, I've had good experiences with it. And you're not trying to say, oh, that one time. You want to kind of demonstrate that you've tried it a lot of times, and so maybe there's something here. But that comes dangerously close to trying to prove that you're right about it, which there's two problems. First of all, you might actually be trying to prove that you're right about it, which isn't really possible in most of these games, as an example, but really just ever. And two, if you are trying to just telegraph that you've thought about it a bit, personally, I find people generally misinterpret. They tend to latch on to the few facts. To me, this is that temptation one. This is when you're watering the grass. Look at the picture. You're watering the grass, and so often overwatering a plant is what kills it. To me, it's like that. This one is like, you just need to stop. Don't use a sprinkler. Leave out the water, let it sit, let it dechlorinate. You leave your water out overnight, there'll be bubbles. The chlorine used in the water purification treatment process in many parts of the world will gas out. This can be safer for some kinds of plants, like I keep air plants and I usually do this for them. I'll get them water I'm going to dunk them in and then leave it out overnight. This is that dubious facts sprinkler. Here's the other thing. Doing that itself may not have much impact, but neither does it cost very much to do. I mean, overall, I feel like just withholding these things, saying less, it can be more. So for me, this one is, I guess, simple, but we're getting into the territory of types of knowledge gunk that are like an actual problem. We're getting into info hazard territory. So this one, I don't want to leave too much of a free pass. I'm saying, oh, just don't water your crops. Turn the sprinkler off. Don't overwater the plants. Don't water your crops is not a good conclusion. This one also looks like the fountain, but the thing is that without context for thoroughly understanding the facts and outpouring literally all contextual information, these can be more trouble than they're worth. I mean, it's like when people say, but I've heard so many people say, this brand isn't good, or, this game isn't good. Well, yeah, you've heard like 10 or 15 people say that out of, maybe a couple million. It doesn't particularly matter. And because you don't have the full fount of all knowledge, the sprinkler, well, it feels like it's just, well, it's not as good, but it's a subset of that information. This is not like the fountain where you don't get a better system for parsing the information. The sprinkler, by its limitations, actually comes with a bad system for interpreting the information. The sprinkler head itself could be, it's a bit grody, is what I'm saying. It needs to be cleaned. The sprinkler head itself, that fountain, I mean, I don't know about you. I would drink out of that fountain. I would. That sprinkler head, I would not attach my mouth to the sprinkler head. There's been a lot of like fellatio references in this parlay so far. I think that's settled about that. Maybe don't, and I don't think you'd be happier with yourself if you did. Perhaps better to leave it out. See if you really want to include all that stuff. Let the chlorine evaporate out, or maybe there will be no such thing that you need to avoid. But it doesn't hurt. And finally, the puddle of misleading statistics. This is, okay, you left it out too long. This is that boiling situation. This is when people give the 80% of all statistics are made up. And you really need to grill it. I mean, this is that simple processing. This is the one of the 5 that you really need to like traditionally biochemically treat, boil the heck out of it, get those parasites out of there, really grill the information and see why those things are being presented. To me, this is kind of the opposite of when one sprinkles dubious facts into their explanation. This is like when other people do that. It can be really helpful to stop and look back and think, okay, now that I have some distance from the situation, what's going on? Why did they mention all of those details? Like, what is the approach here? It's often very easy, from my perspective anyway, to see some greater pattern in the thing the person was saying when you're away from the discussion, when you step back and get a moment to think, okay, taking everything that was said as a whole, what's going on here? A lot of the time with statistics in, I guess, media culture, it makes me think, if you claim that your commercial claims that a thing is good more ways, there's not very many ways you can describe or demonstrate that a product is good that are logically valid. So if you do a lot of them, it's pretty unlikely that most of them will be valid things. There's a soap commercial that sticks in my head that I always skip instantly, so I don't remember any more of it than this. But the very beginning is like, the guy says, I think I've referenced this in a Parley before, you're not a dish, and he throws a dish at like a tree or something and it breaks, and he says, you're a man. And then it cuts over to a table where some guy in the outdoors is sitting there with soap, and the guy says, most name brand body washes you put on your skin are legally categorized as detergent. I skip the ad. That's about the earliest you can do, but I've heard this ad many times. And it's always taking money from the baby, as it were, because I will never click on it, because that isn't a valid claim. That's just irrelevant. They're trying to make me feel shocked, like I shouldn't be using some low quality. I've been tricked into using some low quality thing. Well, hold on. I mean, what legally qualifies as a detergent? It could just be pedantic. There's no particular meaning. It just so happens that the legal word used is detergent. It might be that there's something really going on here, but I highly doubt this ad that didn't say, here's why our product is better for you, but instead said, hey, let me scare you. I highly doubt you're going to be the one random masculinity baiting social commercial is going to be the one to make my skin healthier, right? This needs to get that boiled down treatment. Let's stop, the clickbaity, very fast-paced ad for long enough to discuss what you just said, and I think it will be clear that it isn't of any consequence. This is that type of situation. The puddle maybe will just evaporate away when you boil it. It could be worth, going into the ether. To me, the entire conclusion I have for these largely fact-based sources of hydration is that they are not ambrosia. Nay, it is surprising in life, in my opinion, how rarely facts are actually necessary to make a good decision. Usually it's like, if there is a knowledge bit to know, you need to know the chemical composition of a substance. That is a time for learning the factoid. You need to go get the chemical structure of the molecule. But when I remember the politics in my part of the world, only vaguely, thankfully, discussing, there's this meme of alternative facts. This is not what I'm talking about. I just think that people get very overly caught up on saying this is the truth, or that is the truth, or da-da-da-da-da, when in fact, for a lot of people, it's kind of beside the point. It's really what the person's agenda is, or what it is they really want under there. Most people don't say a thing that they present as true because they are a scientist in the pursuit of knowledge. You know what I mean? They say it because they feel like there's some rhetorical value to doing so. When I have my tap of occasional insight that I like so much, I don't save those things because I think they're so good. I save them because it's a resource that I want to ponder further and see what it develops into. In and of itself, the piece of information is useless, of course, without someone to interpret it. Even the fount of all knowledge, without any system to parse through that knowledge, is nothing. And it's much more important to have the approach to how to consume it. Or the approach might be to not consume it at all. Hello, puddle. And so, I don't know, I guess the thing that I found interesting about looking through these is that for many of them, the answer is wait or less. you know, was what I tended to say. You could do a really weird personality quiz about this one, although personality quizzes are not really. But anyway, let's conclude by answering that parlay that you dug back up. I thought this was a fun addition to for the end. I'll read it again. You said it's an archive parlay from some 2.5 years ago. For folks unfamiliar, this is a thing I do during my streams where right before the stream starts, I quickly record a little Q&A segment with people that have submitted tiny prompts through a form that I post during my streams. So it might be like a Monday stream, and at the end of the stream or the middle of the stream, both times, I'll post a little Google form. You can click it and submit like a mini parlay, basically. And then I answer it off the cuff, just like parlay, but just in a much shorter period of time, like 5 minutes, as a little pre-recorded break in the middle of the stream. So when I go get a beverage or, take a piss or whatever, I have something that you can enjoy. You can still hear entertainment. I don't run an ad break then. You get it. This was an archive parlay. It was one of those. The Norse god Odin gave an eye to sup from Mimir's well of wisdom. As a fellow connoisseur, what flavor notes do you think were present? Spicy, lit, or even dank? I think it tasted very bad indeed, was my first thought. Odin, with his one eye patch, sacrificed one of his eyes to gain knowledge. This is common in religious imagery. And so what did it taste like? What is the taste of gaining, it says wisdom too. And to me, this is only going to be meaningful if I define that somehow. So I will arbitrarily define that as not the same as knowledge. This is, you got a better system for interpreting things. Something about the taste alone, not magic. Let's put it on hard mode. It needs to be a taste that would inherently improve your system for interpreting the world. How could that be? The best thing I can think of is it tasted really bad, like very just awful, universal terribleness in every way, not just the most bad, but the most bads, bad in the most ways. Why? Because the moment you've had that, you have drank the bad coffee, as it were. Now, all of the things that you drink afterward are going to taste a lot better. Every bad thing you ever drink from now on will be less unpleasant for the memory of having drank this universe-level terror of a beverage. By just tasting that, you have improved your perspective on drinks permanently in some way. This is a thing you could theoretically do in real life, though I'm not sure I would recommend just drinking something gross. I don't know, maybe I do recommend drinking something gross. Anyway, that's the best I can think of, is the idea that it's something that just by the taste of it, it recontextualizes what you think about everything else. We could go kind of magic, but to me, the summary for something that changes your perspective like this is like a harmless but memorable hardship. It's like when something is bad, but it's kind of funny, if you can think of examples of this in your own life. I find those things are strangely very valuable. Like it is useful to think of that in a way, rolling in the gachapon game and getting atrocious luck, but in a way where you get like a lot of good things, but just not the thing you wanted, something like that, can be the most learning, the most fun, even though it was bad, but also you kind of learn the most from it. You learn it's not even about getting unlucky. This is just not a thing that will obey your whims. I mean, it's gambling. Of course, you should understand that, but that is the example that comes to mind. Using these different forms of liquid as, I guess this is a comic from somewhere, but I liked this parlay. I thought this was a fun structure for talking about different ways that you can handle like lots or different uses of information. And from previous communication parlays or just previous parlay in general, I have kind of a bone to pick with the overemphasis of like objective fact. It's not that I think that like people's facts are wrong, but I think people have a real over attractiveness to just being correct. Like I often think when people are arguing about something being like true or whatever, there's not really, we both know there's a right answer and we might just not know it. Like if it's like the structure of a molecule or whatever. I don't know why people be arguing about that, but there is just an answer. And so the fact that there is an argument going on about it, to me, demonstrates that it really isn't about the piece of information. It's about being right. I so often find that people who are interested in just objective facts are interested in them not because they're interested in knowledge, but because it feels like it's a way that they can win, like objectively win a discussion, because there is a single answer. Like a math problem, they can just calculate it and be correct, and then no one can take that away from them, which I have never seen that be a healthy type of stance to have. To me, it's good to be willing to embrace the unknown a little bit. Not that it is at all bad to pursue knowledge. I just think that often when people focus on facts, like the sprinkler of dubious facts and puddle of misleading statistics, that kind of fact, if you look closely, it really isn't about information. It's about being right. So it's interesting to see how, to various degrees, some of these ways of dispensing information kind of telegraph that more than others. We're going a little long, actually, but I think this is a fun point to end on. Having just all the information and having little bits of information don't often read that way. It's people that suddenly turn on the sprinkler more so, or have a puddle lying around in the yard, a bucket, perhaps. It's those forms of knowledge that are kind of telegraph frustration a little bit, where it's not not ubiquitous or very occasional, but there's just like a little splash of it is a weirdly good way in real life. Actually, it's funny how well this metaphor works for me anyway. For when knowledge is being used to be correct instead of to learn. I think. Does that make sense at all? I'll leave the parlay on that.